Welcome back to the Stewardship Leader podcast. I'm your host, Hart, business growth strategist, fractional CMO, wife, and homeschooling mom of three. Last Sunday, I posted something on Substack and shared on social media that I wasn't planning to write. It came out of an ordinary day after attending mass, batch cooking, tortilla night, and RJ and I sitting down for an hour and a half to prayerfully map out our 2026-2027 homeschool year. At the end of that post, I shared that I'll unpack one simple exercise that has been incredibly powerful for RJ and me in my podcast. So this is that episode. It's the exercise that helped RJ and I intentionally design our life, make decisions with the future in mind, and keep building the life God is calling us to steward. We've done it every year for the past 10 years, and starting this year, we've committed to doing it every single quarter. I also want to be honest with you, and I know this one gets personal. It brought RJ to tears the first time he really sat with it 4 years ago, and I tell you why. Because I think his story is the reason this exercise matters as much as it does. Let's dive in. Here is the exercise stripped all the way down to one sentence. If today were your last day, what would you regret? I know how that lands. It's not exactly a light Tuesday morning question. It's not what's your 5 year revenue goal or what's your next launch. It's heavier than that. It's supposed to be. Because here's what I've noticed both in my life and in the lives of the entrepreneurs and leaders I work with every single day. Most of us aren't making bad decisions. We're making decisions in the minors while the majors quietly wait their turn. We optimize our calendars, the content we put on social media, the funnels, and we tell ourselves we'll get to the bigger questions later. And when things settle down, when the business hits the next milestone, when there's more margin, later is not a plan. Later is just much more comfortable word for never. So once a year for the last 10 years, RJ and I sat down together and asked ourselves this question honestly, not as a productivity hack, as a posture, as stewardship of the one life we've actually been given. So I want to tell you why this question isn't theoretical for my husband. RJ's father died when he was 40 years old. RJ was 11. Sit with that for a second because I've had to sit with it many times over the years we've been married. 11 years old, and the person who was supposed to walk him through the rest of his life was gone. 40 years old, barely midlife by most people's math, and his story was already finished. 4 years ago, when we sat down for an annual version of this exercise, RJ did the math almost without meaning to. He looked at where he was in his life and realized how close he now stood to that age his father was when he died. And something in him broke open. He wasn't crying because the question was sad. He was crying because the question was suddenly no longer hypothetical. It had a face, it had a timeline, it had his father's name on it. And that's the moment RJ decided he wasn't going to wait for Sunday to live like today mattered. He made a decision, not a resolution, a decision to live now as if it could be his last season, not in a fearful way, but in a faithful way. Present with his children, present with me, present in the business we built together, and present in his own walk with God, because he watched up close and far too early what it looks like when a life ends before a man thought it would. Every year since, when we ask this question again, RJ isn't just doing an exercise, he's honoring his father. He's making sure that if his story were to end today too, the answer to what would I regret gets shorter every single year, not longer. That's the weight behind this exercise for us. And that's why I don't think we could do it just once and check the box. Some questions you have to keep asking because the honest answer changes as your life goes. So let me walk you through what this actually looks like in practice because I don't want to leave you with just the emotion of it. I want to give you something you can use today. And now every quarter, RJ and I sit down, usually with no phone, sometimes with a cup of tea, sometimes with nothing but a notebook between us and a prayerful work through a few questions together. Honest questions, really. So if today were our last day, what would we regret not doing, not saying, and not becoming? Where are we living out of alignment and where are we living out of alignment with what we say we value most, our faith, our family, our health, our calling? What decision have we been postponing because it feels safer to wait? If we already have everything we dreamed about 10 years ago, what are we being asked to build toward for the next 10, 20, 30, or more blessed years? So, this last one is what we did just this past week. We had already wrapped our current homeschool year, but we spent an hour and a half planning and mapping out the 2026-2027 school year for us, not just logistically, but against our family's 5 year vision. A vision centered on our faith, our family, and our children's education. Because August through October are about to be full of competitions and travel for us as a family. And if we don't plan on purpose, the calendar will plan for us. That's the real function of this exercise. It's not about morbid reflection, it's about letting the honest awareness of a finite life inform the very concrete decisions of an ordinary day. You know, what we say yes to, what we let go of, and what we build our year around. So here's what I don't want to skip past because it's a past that gives me chills every time I think about it. When we look back this past week, before we look forward, we realize something. Almost everything RJ and I dreamed about 10 years ago has come to fruition. Today, we live a true faith and family first life. We have time freedom, we have location freedom, and decision freedom. And for the past 8 years, we've taken ownership of homeschooling our three children together. And the business we built became the catalyst for all of it. We're actively involved in our church and our local pastoral community. For the past year, we've intentionally prioritized our health, our fitness, and our nutrition. Our lives are our own, which means we get to be all in parents to our children, and we get to generously support the people and causes closest to our hearts. And none of that was an accident. It was lots of sacrifice, teamwork, prayer, and intentional action. And I want to be honest, it was also this exercise asked over and over that kept redirecting us back to what actually mattered when it would have been easier to just stay busy. We know we're capable of more, but more was never the point. Alignment was. So let me tell you what this exercise is actively shaping for us right now, because I think it's a good picture of what it looks like to plan a season on purpose instead of just surviving it. This August, our daughters, Erin and Margot, both step into competition season, and Margot's very first group ballet competition, while Erin is in her second year and is continuing to grow in her technique and her character on stage. Before either of them competes, we pray over them, not for medals, but for their identity to stay rooted in who God says they are before any ranking or applause ever gets a vote. In September, I'm flying to the US on my own to visit my brother and his family, and it's a trip I've been looking forward to for a while. In October, I'm saying yes to something I've never done before, traveling solo for the first time to attend the Call to Lead in South Florida. It's a room full of accomplished entrepreneurs and women business leaders who genuinely champion each other's growth. I want to come home a better steward of the business, the leadership, and the calling God has entrusted to me. And then I'll be flying back home to the Philippines to travel as a family for Erin's first ever international ballet and contemporary competition, to the International Arts Festival in Thailand. We're extending our stay a little bit so we can explore the country together as a family afterward. I'll be honest, these 3 months ago, a season like this would have felt impossible to plan around. But because RJ and I already did the harder work of asking what we'd regret and building our year against our 5-year vision, this isn't chaos. It's stewardship in motion. I also want to mark something small but meaningful. 6 weeks ago, I launched this podcast, The Stewardship Leader, and my Substack alongside it. If you told me 10 years ago, back when RJ and I were dreaming on paper, that I'd one day have a platform to talk about business, faith, family, and stewardship all in the same breath, I'm not sure I would have believed you. But here we are, 6 weeks in, I'm still learning the rhythm of it, still showing up anyway. And that's actually its own small proof of this whole exercise. Somewhere in a past version of this question, this podcast was probably the answer to what would I regret not starting. So here's my invitation to you, and I want to make it practical, not just inspirational. Set aside, 30 minutes this week with your spouse or with a trusted friend or on your own with your journal and your Bible, and ask yourself honestly, if today were my last day, what would I regret? Not the version of the answer that sounds impressive, but the real one. Then ask the second question, because this is the one that actually changes human behavior. What is one decision I've been postponing that I could make now instead of when? Because here's what I keep coming back to. So many of us say, I'll do that when I have more money, more time, more certainty. But so often we're not actually waiting for those things. We're just avoiding the decision. And you could, in most cases, simply decide to do the thing now. You don't need a tragedy to prompt this question. RJ would tell you he wishes he never had the reason he has, but you don't need his reason to ask his question. You just need the honesty to ask it before life asks it for you. Now, you might be wondering why your business growth strategies just spent 15 minutes telling you a story about a brief and a family planning session instead of funnels and forecasts. You know, Here's the honest answer. It's the same skill set. Every quarter I sit down with clients and ask them to look at their numbers, their systems, and their offers honestly without flinching and build the next 90 days against a vision instead of just reacting to whatever's loudest that week. You know, that's not a different discipline than what RJ and I do at our kitchen table. That's not a different discipline than what RJ and I do at our dining table. It's the same one. Ask the honest question, look at the gap between where you are and where you said you wanted to be, and decide on purpose instead of drifting. I don't help clients build businesses because I love strategy for its own sake. I help them build businesses because a well stewarded business is what buys you freedom to actually ask a question like, if today were my last day, what would I regret? And have the time, the margin, and the decision freedom to do something about the answer. The business is the vehicle, the life is the destination. So if today's episode felt like a departure from what I usually share, it isn't. It's the reason behind everything I usually teach and share. So, if there's one thing I want you to walk away with today, it's this: a life of no regrets isn't built in one dramatic moment. It's built one honest quarter at a time, one aligned decision at a time, and one faithful yes and a one faithful no at a time. RJ carries his father's story with him every day, not as a weight, but as a reason to be present, a reason to stop postponing, a reason to build a life today that he wouldn't regret if it were his last. I hope this episode gives you a version of that same reason without needing the same loss to get there. So before we wrap up, here's one action step this week. Ask yourself the question, write down the honest answer, not the polished one, and then pick just one postponed decision and move on it this week, not someday. That's how you start living a life of no regrets, not all at once. One honest question asked consistently over years. So thank you for spending this time with me today and for letting me get personal with you. If this episode moved something in you, and I'd love to hear about it, come find me on Substack and tell me what's one decision you've been postponing that you could make now instead of when. And if you're not already subscribed to the Stewardship Leader on Substack, I'd love to have you there. Every week, I share reflections on business, faith, family, and what it actually looks like to steward the life God has entrusted to us. And if you'll be at Call to Read in South Florida this October, send me a DM and I would love to connect with you in person. Until next time, remember, build a business you can steward, not one that owns you. I'll see you in the next episode.